Fáilte. Welcome to Folklore Friday with myself, Lora O'Brien. And this week we're going to, by special request, we're going to look at the quite long story of Bob Buckley and the Púca. So we mentioned this a week or two ago, I think, in our Folklore Friday on the Púca specifically, and I just had a little extract. And a couple of people in the comments asked for the full version. So there's a lot in this story about Bob Buckley, and it kind of covers a lot of ground. There's a lot of fairy lore in it, so I thought it might be a good one to have a look at. And it comes from Castle Pollard in County Westmeath, and the teacher is Mrs. Davitt. And as usual, we're looking at dukas.ie website, and the links are down below. So do go and have a look yourself, and do a bit of transcribing while you're there, because there's a lot of stuff that we can search now that is searchable because people have been transcribing it on a volunteer basis. So make it an offering and you know, do a bit of work and give back to the community in this way. So, during the few weeks that intervened between Easter Sunday and May Day, we three youths were punctual in our evening visits to Darby Gallagher's domicile. But though we adopted many ruses and performed many friendly offices, we failed in our attempts to elicit another story from the Shanachie relating to the good people. The reason, however, became sufficiently apparent when we listened to his hard cough and short respiration. Oh, I feel you, Shanachie. He was not in proper form. So, just a sliahán of a cold. Sliahán of a cold he's got, explained Biddy as she piled on the fragrant turf sods, and sign it's few that's escaping it. There's few that's escaping it, I think, in this contrary weather. However, on May Eve, thanks to Biddy's unremitting care and her knowledge of simple memories, we were glad to find the old man convalescent. In a word, Darby was himself again. "Bedad, Darby," said Logan, bustling into the little kitchen in his usual unceremonious manner. "It's proud we are to see you hale and hearty again." "And who told you I was either one or t'other?" snapped Darby, trying to appear offended. "Well now, couldn't a blind man see by the grand decorated May bush you've set up there that there was no one sick inside? Isn't that the pagan meaning of it? Then I'm a don't force me to, a vihan ogli. Aye, some cracked professor inside the universities might call it a pagan custom, for them cranks are always on the gad after novelties." That's interesting, isn't it? So the May bush is set outside. We don't really do a May pole in Ireland, but there's plenty of references to the May bush around Bealtaine. Do have another video on Bealtaine tradition, so you can have a look at that in the folklore playlist. But thanks be to God, we've no need for their nonsense. For sound knowledge, it is not. The tradition of the May bush is very short and simple, like all good things. When flying from the Jews, the Blessed Virgin entered the house on a certain town to seek food and shelter for the Holy Family. People of the house were moved to grant her request, but a spy suspected her movements, and in order to make no mistake about identifying it, where all the houses resembled one another, he stuck a bramble before the door and hurried off for the guards. But lo and behold, when they arrived back with chains and daggers, every house in the street had a bush decorated with flowers growing before the door, and so the crafty Jews were baffled. Sorry, that's a bit racist. Now, I'm just going to take a little breath here for a cough. I need some of Biddy's remedies. That is obviously a very, very it's a rewriting, shall we say, of an older pagan tradition. Now, we're not them lads above in the universities looking for novelty value, but we do know that the Bealtaine May bush goes back a lot further than the Virgin Mary hiding from anybody with daggers. Excuse me. So you can see why I haven't been uploading as many videos. I do try and do 3 videos a week, and my schedule has gotten thrown off track because of coughing and spluttering. So apologies for that. My immune system is shot to hell, but anyway, we're working on it. So that is actually, not only is it a reworking into a Christian tradition of an older pagan tradition, but it is also incorporating one of the myths and common motifs about catching a leprechaun. And so this lad is above in a field and he hears one of the good neighbours working on whatever he's working on, and he lays a hold of him and tries to get his pot of gold and tell him where it is. So he won't let him go until he gives him the location, but as soon as he gives him the location, it's buried, of course, and as soon as he gives him the location, he realizes he's nothing to dig it up with. So he knows that he'll forget where it is. So he marks the spot with a handkerchief or sticking something in the ground or whatever it is. And then when he comes back then, and he makes the leprechaun swear that he won't touch it. But when he comes back, he can't tell. There's the same red handkerchief as the story that I read as a kid. Same red handkerchief or red scarf or whatever it was is on every bush in the field, and sure, there's no telling which is which. So the poor owl lad, or the poor young lad, spends the rest of his life till he's an owl lad digging up that field looking for this buried treasure. So anyway, we're back to Darby and his Christianized stories. So that's all very good and Christian-like, commented Dick, but was not Maeve a pagan feast, same as Holly Eve? True for you, Avic. Avic is like a pet name, my son, basically. I'm of the opinion that our Christian people beat the pagans hollow in regard to the number and variety of their pishogues, though I won't say, but some of them may be harmless enough. Just the sort of performance you'd expect from an Omadon or Anshu that forgot the catechism. It's an awful blend here and rewriting of history. To be sure, we take it that all sorts of fairy folk are extravagant. I'm not sure what a lot of these are obviously colloquialisms, and I would have to see them. They're written kind of phonetically, and I would have to see them in the Irish to actually be able to tell what they are. I'm familiar with some of them, like a Vic and Amadon is a fool. A Vic is a pet name for my son. You know, it's used from an older person to a younger person generally. So there's a couple of them where I know what they are. I'll absolutely translate them and pull them out. If there's any others that I haven't done that for and I'm not familiar with, feel free to comment below if you know what it is or what it might be. So Stravagan about on May Eve, and we know also that any woman that does do her churning on May morning before sunrise with a Kieran gad round the dash and a wooden bowl of water from the heart of the spring is likely to have her butter taken by some bad neighbours, or just as bad, whisked away on the Púca's back for the sole use and benefit of some roistering leprechaun. Roistering is like having fun and causing ructions, causing trouble. This lad lives upon butter and honey. His appetite is awake. It must be, remarked Logan, for in all the stories about him, he's always apparently busy cobbling away on one old shoe. So this is the leprechaun. That's how he came by his name, observed Darby. Le Brogan, the half shoemaker. Half in this case meaning half of a pane, for when he mends one, he sends it home and gets back the other one. So la is actually half and brogan is a small shoe. So that bit's right. Anyway. And who is this is his messenger, does anybody know? Cut in Billy Breen, who thought it better to take out a few points and not leave all the running to Logan. Bedad, he's not above his own business, he's not. And when he wants to go on a journey, he just mounts a Púca. And my word for it, he won't be long crossing the side of a county, so he won't. The Púca, sure Darby, I always thought that lad was a kind of horned ass, trying to get some innocent gossoon to ride him until he'd play the devil with them. So gossoon here is from gosson, which is actually a Norman remnant rather than an Irish one, but it's used colloquially in Ireland to mean a young boy or a young man, particularly around this part of Westmeath, County Roscommon, that kind of area. You're not too far out, Bilyovic. He's a limb of the devil, all right, and he has none of the harmless donkey about him, though he might dander by you in that shape if you happen to meet him on the road. Billy was knocked into a brown study. Only the previous night he was sorely tempted to take a rise upon a wandering donkey as he passed his father's gate. In fact, it was the negative shake of his head and the wide pendant switch of his tail that decided the matter. And now to think that the brute might have been a Púca travelling incognito. It was a reflection almost deep enough for tears. Them Púcas are supposed to spoil the fruit grown in gardens about Hollantide, remarked Dick. That's Samhain. They do indeed, said Darby, but they fix a written notice to every tree they meddle with, which seems fair. Fair enough, only nobody can make out the Púca's writing but himself. Ach, it's all cush cínta, fireside talk and nonsense, asserted Billy, who could ever show proof that he ever encountered either a leprechaun or a Púca. I knew one, said Darby solemnly, that had the misfortune to get into contact with both, and that was Bob Buckley, half-brother to Ger Toomey that I told you about. The poor foolish Amadon, commended Biddy, sotto voice, as she moderated the speed of her wheel, spinning wheel. Then, looking across at Darby, she added, maybe you'd frighten the chaps by killing it. No, 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 we vociferated in chorus. Let's have it at any risk. The Shanachie leaned back on his straw cushions, rested his pipe on the hob, communed with himself for a short time, as though summoning up his reminiscences from the dead past, and then commenced. Here we get Bob Buckley's story. Bob Buckley, as I have said, was a half-brother to Ger Toomey, but he was very unlike the poor sailor both in character and disposition. He was a wild, reckless, devil-may-care lad from the day he put on his first breeches. No mischief escaped him, and he broke his poor mother's heart, who was made twice a widow because in spite of all she could do, he refused to be confirmed. The catechism was a sealed book for him. Not that he was dull in other ways, far from it. He'd steal the cross off your beads if he thought he could turn it into money. Those are the rosary beads, which would be the prayer beads that Catholics use with a cross on the end of them. Didn't his mother send him one day for a clutch of hatching eggs and gave him a shilling to pay for them? Bob pocketed the shilling and brought back the egg safe and sound, for which his mother rewarded him with a butter cake. But one morning, at daybreak, she was wakened by strange sounds close at hand and peered out from under the bedclothes. What did she see but half a score of young cranes? She took them to the devils, of course, twisting and sprawling all over the floor. Then again, didn't he hatch the rat that was stealing his mother's hen eggs from a bit of a unda, the stepladder, bit of a... Didn't he catch the rat rather than hatch the rat? If you're doing any transcribing, just be a bit careful. Didn't he catch the rat that was stealing his mother's hen eggs from the bit of a... It is actually difficult work transcribing these. I can't make it out. So, from a bit of a something under the stepladder where the decent hawker woman used to sleep of nights, for which his mother agreed to pay him 2p and halfpenny. Bat, I presume that's Bob. Bob set his trap, a fairly strong one, and bright and early next morning, poor widow Toomey was roused from her slumber by an unearthly screech, which no living rat could accomplish, and on making investigations in fear and trembling, here, does she find her decent lodger holding up her right hand, which was fairly and firmly gripped by the telltale trap. Aye, there was another grand exploit of him. A carman, what you'd call a carter, used to pass through the high road from Dublin once every fortnight, and he was always accompanied by a bulldog that was the terror of all the dogs along the wayside. The carman used to boast that he was unconquerable. Bob fell in with him and bet all the money he had, which amounted to 1 6p, against the carter's odds of 4 to 1, that he himself, single-handed, could make Nelson, as he called the dog, run for his life the next time he passed that way. The day came, and the man came, and the dog came. The carter declared he did not want trouble, but if the lad wanted to get rid of his life, he advised Buckley to provide a bit of a blackening box to carry off his remains. The bystanders began to feel uneasy. Buckley, unconcerned apparently, was standing in a doorway of a stable. The duelling distance was marked. The word was given and the dog came on with a gurgle gurgle like a waterfall. But if he did, he flew back twice as quick and never cried halt till he knocked against his namesake in Sackville Street. That's what was Nelson's Pillar in Sackville Street, which is now O'Connell Street. Nelson's Pillar was blown up because Nelson shouldn't have been there in the first place and should never have been called O'Connell or Sackville Street. That was the English name on it. Anyway, at the time it was obviously called Sackville Street. The plot was that Bob had a príoscín of fire shawns tied around him. I don't know what they are either. A match was applied when the word was given and Nelson received the full blaze in his eyes, which no four-footed dog could withstand. But if Bob delighted in any mischief more than another, it was in riding unbroken horses. Let him once get his leg over a horse and he'd ride to the devil, so to speak, before he'd get a fall. He managed to get in as understable boy at Major Reynolds, but the regular exercises wouldn't satisfy Bob. He managed to get possession of the keys a few times and enjoyed some moonlight steeplechases all by himself. He ended up by breaking a hunter's leg, and though it was tried to prove him over age for a reformatory, he was sent to one for 3 years, though it didn't reform him much. So he got sent to prison for riding, I suppose stealing and riding the landlord, the major, who is the English landlord at the time, one of the hunter's horse's legs, while he was out riding the steeplechase. And got sent away anyway, got sent for 3 years. He picked off a bit of the shoemaking trade, and when he came back he set up as a cobbler. He seemed to go on middling well for a while until he fell in with the leprechaun. I'll just take a blast of the pipe, for we're coming to the turn in Bob Buckley's career. I was saying he met with the leprechaun, for upon one harvest day he was making a short cut to the village, when he found himself obstructed by a big field of ripe corn, and sooner than lose any time going round, he made a straight path through the centre, for Bob was no respecter of persons or property. He had got about halfway when he heard a mighty strange click-click sound ahead of him. There was an old gravel pit there, and the sounds proceeded from it. So very cautiously parting the corn in front of him, Bob peeped over the edge. There was the old shriveled dwarf, sure enough, and he pegging away for bare life. Bob measured his ground in a jiffy. 10 feet separated them, and he had the advantage of the fall. He jumped and got the fall right enough, but little more. Well, his hand closed on that little, and when he got over the shock, he saw that his hand grasped the little basket in which the old rascal had carried his tools, his cobbling box. It was a rod basket woven of twigs, not thicker than thranines, shaped and coloured in a way that only a fairy could put together, not bigger than a matchbox. It contained a few tools, a ball of red wax, not bigger than a berry, a ball of hemp finer than silk, and other appurtenances too small for the naked eye to see. Bob pondered the affair for some time. The leprechaun might want his basket back, and if he did, he would pay a dear price for it. 'Twas himself paid the dear price for his interference, murmured Biddy, as she fastened a streak of flax to the wooden rock and fixed her thread on the flyer. Biddy's still spinning away in the corner over there. He had to leave back the basket, I suppose, said Billy. I didn't say he did yet, said Darby. Sorry, was Darby's short rejoinder. He went into the village, I say, and he made himself happy with drink, to use his own expression, and when he was returning by moonlight, he met the Púca. Now, you have only a hazy idea of what the Púca is like in disposition and appearance. One says he's a horned ass, another says he's a kind of goat of the male sex, or billy goat. Well, I admit they are good guesses enough. He resembles an ass at some distance away, but when you come close to him, you see that he has all the marks and tokens of a goat. Head, feet, hair, and colour, not leaving out the brimstone small. And it stands to reason, for isn't Púca our Irish word for buck goat, and it's also one of the titles of the old boy, the divil. You often heard the vulgar expression, go to Puck or go to buggery, Puckera, without knowing exactly what it meant. Well, we'll just be getting along. Buckley was sauntering along an old boreen. So boreen is a small road, basically, from boher, which is road, and een on the end of the words are like a diminutive. So boreen would be a small road or a lane. He was regretting he didn't succeed in kicking up a row with a few more of the boys, when just at an angle where there is an old broken down well, he knocked upright straight against a large hairy animal, which at first he mistook for an ass. Then, when he got a whiff of the brimstone and he was munching some Kasha Púcas, it's Púca's cheese. Púca's cheese, as it means in Irish. He knew the gentleman he had to deal with. Now, Púca's cheese is obviously a type of plant or berry maybe, but I'm not sure what that is. That's interesting. Of course, you will think he passed him by with all the respect he was capable of showing, but no, Buckley wasn't built that way. Instead of that, he took the buck by the horns and mounted him like a charger. Away for Ballyhurley, shouted Bob, when up went the Púca several perches in the air and then shunted back again full as quick. Well, he twisted and reared and kicked and curvetted till he was black in the face, but Buckley held on, and at last he shot across the face of the country with the speed of a cannonball. Excuse me. Helter-skelter, up and down, hither and over they went like mad, and it was only when the cocks began to crow that Bob was tossed on a heap of broken stones beside the roadway, where he found himself the next morning with all his bones bruised but none of them broken. Lucky Bob. The last thing he remembered was the Púca taking a bite out of his coat, but if he aimed for the leprechaun's tool basket, he just missed it by half an inch, for he showed it the next day when he came to borrow a shilling. I advised him to send it to the museum, but he thought the real owner would make a handsome lid for it. A good many rides, more than he cared for, Bob got on the same Púca, for he would call for him on nights, and when the cobbler would hear the words, "Come forth, Buckley," the unfortunate man would have to throw down his last and obey the summons. So here we have the leprechaun. Is it the leprechaun calling? It's unclear here whether, because there's examples in both the lore where you can call the Púca or the Púca can call you, basically. So it could be either. But somebody was, you see, they're both cobblers, so this could be the leprechaun or Bob Buckley. But it does say, "Come forth, Buckley." So I'm going to presume that the leprechaun is calling Bob Buckley, because that is actually a little bit more common in the stories where the good neighbours would have their fun with making humans right around the countryside. At length, this state of affairs became unbearable, and he wandered away elsewhere to seek some change of fortune. Right, so we're definitely talking about Bob Buckley. I should have just read on, sorry. Kilshandry wasn't sorry to get rid of him, for, though an excellent cobbler, it was the only good point he had. Sorry. For the space of 2 or 3 years, we missed all trace of him, and then I chanced in with a journeyman tailor who knew him well. It appears he settled down in a small town in County Meath, and seldom got on the spree, barring Sundays, which he filled up poaching for drink and poaching for game, just as either came his way, but never giving a thought to mass or devotion. Bob was an old pagan, so he was. The priest tried to reason with him, but all to no purpose. According to his way of thinking, a man should lead a sporty life, even though he had to suffer for it occasionally, and a shilling after a man's death was lost money. The priest gently hinted that more precious things than money could be lost, but he said it was all feshtala, and that if he ever happened to change his mind, he would send for him. It came about, this one isn't transcribed, somebody always got sick of it. came about that one Sunday he was taking a shortcut to a village some miles away. His route led him across some low ground near a big house occupied by a major, Rodney Ramsay. As he hurried along, his ears were attracted by the cries of a child at no great distance from his path, seemingly. He could see no one, young or old, but his dog bounded away behind a shrubbery, and when he poached the sport, he saw a strange sight. A child 5 years old, or thereabouts, was struggling for life in a small, round pond of water, having a stone something and a goat apparently in the same danger, swimming around about it. Having a stone something and a goat apparently in the same danger, swimming around about it. So there's a child, a stone something, and a goat, all in fear of drowning in the pond. It took Bob little time to extricate the child, but when he went to pursue the same office for the goat by seizing it by the horns, it backed quite suddenly and pulled him into the water. Things were now looking, sorry about this, I didn't know that we'd stopped. Things were now looking serious for Bob as the pond was deep and he couldn't get a good hold on the coping. This is the stone coping, whatever a stone coping is. Maybe it's not coping, maybe it's something else. And drowned. He would be in quicker time if the screams of the child didn't bring a half-distracted nursemaid to the place, who helped Bob out onto dry ground. The goat was left to find a watery grave, for Bob swore it pulled him in with the strength of a horse. Major Ramsay was so grateful to Bob for saving his only child that he gave him a weekly pension and a cottage with a garden to live in. And for a couple of years, he seemed like as if he'd give up his bad habits. The Major encouraged him to fill his garden, and the next year he had all kinds of vegetables growing in it so that people passing by the road would always stop and have a look at it. Oh, Bob's settling down. Things were growing on smoothly enough until one hot summer's day, a strange-looking vehicle drawn by a strange-looking something horse and driven by a strange-looking gypsy woman, sorry for that. Gypsy woman in this case is probably one of the travelling community. And this is the unfortunate shorthand that has been used. Gypsy is a slur, so I prefer not to use it, so apologies for that. Drawn by a strange-looking woman, passed along the highway, making so much racket as a train of artillery. A goat, trailing a piece of rope fastened around its neck, followed close behind the car, and strange enough, when it came to Bob's bit of an avenue, it turned in and made itself at home among his cabbages. When Bob went to turn it out, the goat reared up in a playful kind of way and showed fight. This tickled Bob's fancy, and as he was handy with the fists, he went in for a few rounds. but he failed in getting in even one punch, while the goat succeeded in turning him one several times. At last the goat seemed to get tired of this fun and scunted off. Scunted off? Maybe. Like a hare. Buckley was a kind of boy the next day. Buckley was a kind of busy the next day and did not stir from home. I hope you are still following along with this. This is an awful long story. I did warn you, but people asked for it, so we'll keep going. Did not stir from home. He something the leprechaun's basket, which he kept under a glass bowl. He examined the leprechaun's basket, which he kept under a glass bowl in the chimney board in his bit of a room. He now noticed what he didn't something before. Drops of blood here and there upon it. Well, he might have scraped his hand some way in the gravel pit the day he secured the basket, and in his excitement overlooked the drops of blood. But anyhow, it looked mighty queer that they didn't show until that day. It gave him a turn, and it gave him a thought. Next day he would fortify himself with a good strong drink. It might be his last. For after all the priest's warning words kept ringing in his ears, he would take the infernal thing and burn it. Then he would turn over a new life. Good intentions are all very well, but they are apt to fade and die if we do not put them into practice at once. Just as these thoughts were running through his mind, Bob chanced to look through the little window that gave a view of the garden, and there he saw the goat in the centre of his cabbage plot. He didn't make any sudden fuss about it this time. Maybe his nerves were not in proper order. Anyway, he took stock of the bucko, his size and shape and colour. This is the goat. It was the identical beast that raised him in the Major's pond. The same variety of colours showed like patches upon his shaggy hide. The same two grey curls danced in front of his horns, and the same red light beamed from his eyes. It's a fair old description of the Púca, isn't it? And all in something, he made another discovery. This goat, or devil, call it what you will, had all the marks and colours of the Púca he became acquainted with in Killashandry. Bob, as you know, was no coward, so he gripped his blackthorn firmly, that's a blackthorn walking stick, and threw open the door, calling to his dog at the same time. But the creaking of the door gave the goat sufficient warning, it seems, for he bounded across the hedge and disappeared, leaving nothing behind him but a lock of his hair, which the dog secured from his hind quarters. Okay, so the dog attacked the goat and managed to get a lock of his hair in his mouth, obviously. Next day, it was May Eve. Bob went to the village where he fell in with his chum, Alec, the tailor, to whom he related all his adventures and a good many his adventures and escapades over a good many dandies of whiskey. I don't like how things are shaping something at me out. Alec, he says, and something made up my mind what to do. And I have made up my mind what to do. Well now, says Alec, I'm not a good living man myself, but I'd advise you to speak to the priest. You may be right, says Bob, but I've gone too far west to think of turning back. Gone too far west to think of turning back. At any rate, I mean to settle accounts with this old book before this night goes over my head. Tomorrow I may have time to think over what some other fellow called the rules of existence, the something of existence. He produced a shoemaker's knife from an inside pocket, remarking that he would find out whether the goat had a natural wizen or not. And after a parting glass, they separated. Buckley made no further delay. He went home direct and prepared some food for himself. He had not finished eating it when the dog rushed the door and howled. A poor man was approaching the door. Right enough, but the dog's attention was directed to another object. The old familiar goat was cropping some plants in a hollow at the end of the garden. Are you still with me? Fair play to you. A kind of sumera, whatever that is. Again, if I could see it in Irish, I'd be able to figure it out, but this anglicised kind of colloquial turn of phrase, I'm just not familiar with, so apologies for that. Kind of sumera, half water and half mud. Divided it from a something field. Buckley did not take time to put on his hat, so anxious was he to close with his enemy. He seemed to take the goat by surprise, for the dog kept guard of the door, and he was in the act of drawing the knife when the goat knocked him down. In a moment he was on his feet again with his back to the sumera, the half mud, half water place, when a voice in the field behind him shouted, "Stand aside." The something time he had time to make a stir when the book lifted him with a puck in the stomach that sent him curling head over heels into the sumera, where he sank like a stone, never to come up again alive. Oh, poor old Bob Buckley. At the same time, a great racket was heard coming up the road. It was the old woman and her strange yoke, and the poor man standing near Buckley's door said at the inquest that the goat, in passing the house, bowled over the dog with one puck, skipped into the room where there was the noise of broken glass, skipped out again with a doll's basket in his mouth, and followed after the old woman's car. I'm not reading what's there, just for reasons already stated. The old woman's car. We don't use slurs on this channel, not on purpose, at least. It was Major Ramsey's gamekeeper who shouted at Bob to stand aside, for he would have shot the goat, which he had followed from the big house, only Buckley's form came between the believed he-goat came between Buckley's form came between, full stop, I presume. He believed he got in one bullet at the start, but it was not a silver one, and nothing else could finish him. I think we'll be going home, said Billy, billowing his coat. Don't forget, Billy, to wash your face in the May morning dew before sunrise, said Darby. It will charge you into a very handsome boy. Aye. Something's Billy. And have some old she-dog, or she-dog is like a pishog, or Púca licking my face every night. I won't then. The story is firmly believed. So they're telling Billy to wash his face in the May dew, which is the old pagan custom. And Billy says, I will not, because I'll have a she-dog, which is like a small fairy, or a Púca licking at my face every night if I do. So Billy doesn't want anything to do with connecting himself to the good neighbours, as poor old Bob Buckley did. The story is firmly beloved in areas in Westmeath, and it just includes also some sayings and beliefs of the time, some of which are still in use. So this is an older story that, when it was collected, as I say, some of the sayings are still in use, and there are a couple of them like Avic and Gosson and a couple of others that I mentioned that are indeed still in use to this day. So there you go. There's the epic saga of Bob Buckley and the Púca, and there's a lot more than I was able to give in just the excerpt on the Púca. I do have a class on mythical creatures, which is running at the Irish Pagan School, so I will leave a link below where we can find out more about not just the Púca, but other Irish mythical creatures. And other than that, I will see you in the next video. I try and do Folklore Fridays every Friday, obviously. And let me know if there's anything that you particularly would like me to talk about or research on or anything like that from old Irish folk and fairy tales.